So I'm going to start this video off by just saying that net decking is not a bad thing. I'm not here to say that you shouldn't net deck, that it ruins the game, anything like that. I think people who complain that way are pretty incorrect. Net decking is part of every collectible card game, every competitive game, for sure. Now, that being said, personally, I don't net deck. I just don't have as much fun piloting a deck that I didn't make. I really like to deck build, so if I'm going to play Legends of Runeterra, I'm going to do it spending the time playing a deck that I built, and I can take through the ranks and try to climb and perfect that deck by making changes throughout. So this video is going to highlight the process that I would typically go through for trying to build any deck. Now, this deck might end up being something that could be meta eventually if you start by your own idea. It could be just a random idea that you had. It could be a certain concept that you had between multiple regions, etc. So I'm going to start with the process that I take whenever I'm trying to brew anything, whether that would be an off-meta deck or it would end up to be a meta deck. And hopefully this can help you out in your own deck building adventures. So first off, what we're going to talk about here is just identifying a synergy. So your first step is you really want to just figure out something that you want to build around. So I do this by I just scroll through the list of cards. I scroll through the different regions, the different champions, and I try to find something that I want to build around. Now, this could be two different champions. That's quite an obvious synergy, right? Multiple champions it can be paired together to make a decent synergy. It could be two whole regions, right? I could think that Targon and Vandal City hasn't been explored a lot, so let me try to build something with those two regions. It could be literally one card with a region. It could be two cards, etc. So for my example here that I'm going to go through, I'm going to say my idea was I wanted to build Formidable, the new keyword that came out with Galio, with Freljord health buffs. So buffing units with Formidable is a solid strategy. It has good synergy, so I want to try to make something like that work. So step one, I've identified what type of deck I want to make and the synergy that I'm trying to pursue. So up next, what are you going to do? You're going to flesh out, for me, what regions or cards I think are a must. So obviously, I'm fleshing out the regions very easily, right? I have Demacia and I have Freljord. Regions are fleshed out. So now I need to flesh out some cards. This is really determining like the core of your deck. So I don't want to build a 40 card flesh out deck. Now, some people do like to just put 60 cards in the start and then try to cut from there. I prefer a little bit of the opposite way. And again, this is just a preference, so if you like that way, it's totally fine. What I would do is I would pick what I think are the core cards that I definitely want, right? The cards that I was talking about for synergy, and then fleshing that out just a little bit more to make the core of the deck. So in this example, and again, this should be like under 40 cards. You should not have a full deck at this point. You should have, 20 cards tops in there, 25, something like that. So you still have room to go from there. So the core of this deck really is pretty straightforward, right? I took Petricite, Hound, Broadwing, Galio. Those are all formidable units. There's a few other ones, but I kept them out for now. You could easily also slot them in. And then I put the support of Duran Sculptor, Duran Protege, and the Shield of Durand, which are all really good support for the formidable archetype, even though they don't have it. And then, of course, I put the three different Freljord health buffs that had the spark of this idea in general. So I made that core, and I said, okay, this is the core of my deck. This is what I think is going to serve as the very base of what I want to create. So from here, these cards, I'm not saying they can't be changed, but this is where I want to start with my idea. So up next, you want to supply additional support for that main concept. So you can do that in, this is going to really change depending on what your original idea was. So if your original idea was two champions, you obviously aren't going to need an additional champion to come in here, but you're going to need some support around those. If your idea had nothing to do with a champion, now you can figure out, okay, well, which champions do I actually want in this deck? If your idea was all about a win condition, just an end game unit, like a 9-drop or a 10-drop, you need to fill out some support that's earlier in that game. So for this example, I was only using Galio. I still had an open slot for a unit, and Udyr had just come out. And I thought, okay, well, what's a good additional synergy for this formidable package and health buffs? Well, regeneration is a good additional synergy. So I said, why not let's put these units with that provide the stances so I can use the +0, +2, and regeneration stance. So I put Udyr, the Vulpine Wanderer, and the Hayara Allseer, and even Shaman's Call, as you see in the bottom right. So I thought, okay, that's a good idea. That might be able to boost up some of those and get regen on these units that I'm adding a bunch of health to so they can consistently get back to their full health. But on top of that, I knew right away I'm going to need some type of removal, right? At this point, I had no removal unless you count the Petricite Broadwing, which has Challenger. So I say, I'm going to need something to remove things. So I'm in Demacia and Freljord. I could put in some Freljord spells, but I have pretty big units. It's a unit-based deck. Let's do some strike cards. So I put in 2 single combat, 2 concerted strike. I had a good question pop up on the Reddit when I posted this this entire thing here, and it was really about like, why am I picking 2 or 3x of certain cards? Well, in my head, for right now, I'm going at a pretty clean slate, just trying to get a core concept of the deck down. But 3x cards are stuff that I want to see like every game I play this deck, and 2x cards are cards where I think that they could clog my hand if I drew too many of them at too often. So like all of those spells right there, I'm putting in at 2x because I'm not so sure that I need 3x of any of them. They might clog my hand a little bit at that point. But I want to see Udyr. I want to see the Volpine Wanderer, especially the early cards. You want to see those. And then the one questionable one is the All-Seer. Probably doesn't need to be at a 3x, but for this example, I put it in there. So after I've provided additional support for that main concept, now I should have closer to a finished deck. But I should ask myself some questions before I top out my deck, right? Before I just finish out and say, okay, I need 2 more cards, let's do that. Let's ask ourselves some questions. So, first question, do you have a mana curve that will be consistent? So what is your deck doing, right? If your deck is an aggro deck and you look and you have all 5 and 6 drops, you're probably not doing an aggro deck correctly, right? If you're just a standard deck that's a mid-range deck, or even just a any deck that needs to survive against aggro that's not spell-based, you need to have a mana curve that's, actually reasonable. You can't have all 9 drops, all 8 drops. You want to have a solid mana curve that should be a little bit front-loaded. Now, there are different scenarios where that's not always the case, but in general, you want to have something that's going to survive against aggro, especially when you're making a brand new deck. You want to be able to survive against aggro and not just get pounded right away. So then you have no idea if your deck worked because you lost by turn 4. So you got to look at that curve and say, is this curve consistent enough early game and then throughout the mid game? And that's including, do I have a 1 drop? Do I have multiple 2 drops? Do I have a 3 drop? And do I have spells to protect those units as I go and things to remove, etc.? That's the first question you should ask. Second question, do I have a clear win condition? So if you at this point can't identify how you're going to win the game and you have your core concept there and the additional support cards, something went wrong. You have to have a clear idea of how you're going to win each game with this deck, or, like I said, something went drastically wrong. For this example, Galio can level up and rally and get multiple strikes through. And that's a win condition, right? You get rallying and a huge board-wide presence and a consistent board that won't die because you have so many health buffs, and you survive throughout the mid-range. I can see myself winning that way. It's not just a win condition is not just, oh, do I have Atrocity to damage their Nexus above, or do I have Decimate, etc. A win condition is, how can I win the game? And this deck can do so by surviving through the mid-range. I think that's a viable win condition. If I can't find the win condition there, you got to go back and either that original idea might still be fine, but your support cards, you might have added the wrong support cards. You need to add cards that are going to close the game out, that are going to capitalize on what your original idea did, that will help you close the game out. So once you ask those 2 questions, then you can kind of finish your initial draft. So literally all I did here, I had 39 cards at that point, so I added Gorlith as 1 additional top-end closer. I made sure my mana curve was consistent enough, and here is, again, this is the 40-card deck here. The mana curve looks pretty solid, right? I have multiple 2 drops, 8 2 drops, 3 1 drops. I have plenty of cheap spells, and everything looks pretty decent. Do I have a clear win condition? Like I discussed, I think Galio provides a clear win condition, but I was saying, well, maybe if I need a little bit more boost, other than the stances giving overwhelming Galio rallying, I'll put 1 Gorlith the Unscalable in, because he can do a crazy damage attack without being able to be blocked, because he's a brand new card. If you haven't read him, check him out. He's really good. So I said, okay, that'll be the close of the deck. So I have an initial rough draft. Now I finished the deck, good to go. Your job's not done. You really need to play the deck multiple times. So the next step, 100%, is going to be playtesting. Once your deck's complete, play a couple games with it, right? Play 5 to 10 different games with this deck. Get multiple games in before you start making crazy changes. As you're playing those games, try to take notes. It can be physical, it can be mental, of, okay, is this deck surviving against aggro? Can I clearly close out games? Am I weak against control? Do I need more answers to certain elusive units? Do I need X? Do I need Y? Etc. So really try to take notes of, what could I use in this game that will help me consistently if I had it. And you obviously don't, because you're in middle of this deck. And take a note and say, I really wish I had a single combat 4 times out of this game, and I never had it. Maybe I should make that a 3x instead of a 2x. Write that down. But play 5 to 10 games. Don't just play 1 game and lose to aggro and be like, well, this deck sucks. I need to add a bunch of support for early game. You need to add 2 avalanches and healing. It might not be that bad. Play a couple games so you can get actual data. Now, again, even 5 to 10 is not enough to get actual full data to make perfect changes, right? There's plenty of resources out there to help you make those changes better as you look. But for this, 5 to 10, make a change or two that you think will be good. Don't change out entire things unless you clearly think, wow, I screwed up somewhere along the line. I have no way to win a game. But you should have checked yourself at step 4 before that. So at step 5, you'll be playtesting. So as my example here, I played a few games with this deck, and I thought it was performing pretty well. It was doing what it was supposed to. The formidable units were being extremely strong. They were healing a lot. Their regeneration worked really well. The health buffs made the Petricite Broadwing crazy. It felt really good. I could have used a little bit extra cushion at the beginning end, so I actually ended up swapping one Udyr out for a Braum. Now, there's a lot of Udyr haters out. That's a separate video I have to make. Udyr is great in this deck, reducing the stances to 0, but I thought maybe one Braum would be pretty nice. That gives me another unit on board when he makes the Poro. Galio can buff multiple units. That seems cool. But I also fell in absolute love with how Gorlith performed. Gorlith was insane. Gorlith was a drop on the board, has to be answered or you lose the game. He healed my Nexus multiple times because I had less than 10 health, brought me back up to 10, brought me back into the game, or he became just a 20 attack OTK monster. Love Gorlith. So I said I had to fit another one in, so I dropped one Elixir of Iron because I had 3 originally, and there was too many times where I was burning out a little bit because I had too much. So those are the 2 changes I made. So that's what ended up being the first change to this rough draft. And then at this point, what's the next step? You just cycle back into more playtesting. So you make 1 or 2 changes and you go right back to the playtesting. One thing I want to note here is that no card in your deck should be so safe from removal that you said, I can never remove this card. Everything should be questioned, right? Every single card you have in this deck should be able to be removed if it would make the deck worse. So here you're trying to look for multiple things. You're still trying to go off that base list of what do I need? What do I need in this certain situation? Is my deck really good against this but bad against that? And try to figure out those weak points and strong points that your deck has. But also make sure you don't have cards that are just win more cards, right? And that means, like, if I had 3 Gorliths and I had 3 other things that are like pack whatever it is, I forget what it is, the big pack card that is essentially gives everything +2/+2 and overwhelm. If I had that in this deck as well, pack mentality, that's the name. If I had that in this deck and I had all these other things that it was like, oh, once my board was big, that's all win more. Because at that point, if your board's that big and you're that consistently holding your board tight, you probably won the game already. So if you're finding those points in your deck where it says, okay, this card, I already won the game when I had this, I didn't even need to play it, that is a win more card. That's something that you want to notice and try to remove. If you're consistently having a card or a unit that you're just not finding yourself playing a whole lot, and it's sitting in your hand, you're like, I could have played it turn 3, but there was something else I wanted to do, etc., then that's another card you should remove. So this is where you start fine-tuning your deck. And again, that would be another separate video. This is just mainly for me trying to show you guys what I think is the best way to go about building a deck of your own instead of just net decking. Again, nothing wrong with net decking. It's going to be part of every card game. Personally, I don't enjoy it, so I like to try to make my own decks. And this is a process that I've gone through to try to make my own decks as best I could. So if you guys have liked this video, follow us on Twitter for more. I posted this entire spreadsheet here on Reddit, and it got a pretty big following there. I think at the moment it has a ton of upvotes, and people are really enjoying it. So that's why I'm making a video on it, because it seems like something that people clearly are in need of for how to build decks. So if you enjoyed it at all, leave a subscription to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment, and we'll be back for more content. Until next time.